Stuck a freaking barbecue fork in my cat. What does your crazy neighbor do to be labeled the crazy neighbor? Had severe anger issues and yelled at anything or anyone he didn't like on the street. A few years ago he had a road rage incident, and when he started banging on the other car's windows, the occupants got out and beat him badly. During this, he had a heart attack and now barely has enough mobility to walk to the mailbox and back. Also, he doesn't yell anymore. Pulled us over pretending to be a police officer, saying that we had somehow broken the law whilst pulling out of our driveway and that she was going to call it in. She isn't a cop, lol. Edit. I considered using my dashcam video to actually call it in, but we had just moved in and I wasn't sure if she was the type of crazy to burn the house down or poison my dog. After chatting with the other neighbors, it turns out she's just the wannabe homeowner association president in a neighborhood with no homeowner association. So, mostly harmless. Just very annoying. My neighbor sits in his yard, hides behind his plants, and meows at people who pass by. He is not dangerous at all, but he is not right in the head either. His caretakers are his parents and they seem to be very nice people. His dad once told me he just likes to be a cat and left it at that. I didn't ask any more questions. Took my parents to court because he lost in our homeowner association chairman election. Some people just have too much free time. Edit. He actually demanded we pay his legal fees after he lost in court. Twice. I'm the homeowner association president. I get elected over and over again because I just focus on things like making sure the buildings are safe and maintained, and that the grounds are reasonably cared for, or the pool is working. I had some guy come in and was all gung-ho about fixing all the things that were wrong. So I said, "Here, take the job, I don't have a lot of free time anyway." So he takes his year term and basically runs it like the stereotype. Everyone is annoyed. I'm still in the board, so I stop the things I can, but we have a couple other obnoxious busybodies on the board. So I orchestrate a coup. I basically make sure the busybodies on his side don't get re-elected to the board, and then get myself voted back in. He sued me. I think his attorney thought I would just back down. I keep an attorney on retainer because of various reasons. My attorney got the whole thing thrown out in such a way I could sue to costs, so I did. I then went back to running things the way I always did, except I fined him for every little thing I could for like a year. That was super petty, but he sued me. The old lady who lived below me left me multiple cryptic letters blaming me for the birds chirping too loudly in the mornings. Not pet birds. The sparrows and shit outside. This went on for months. He eats my flowers. In his defense, he told us that he has been doing it for years when he introduced himself after we bought the house. He also brought over frozen cookies in a plastic bag, as a housewarming gift, but wasn't sure what was in them. We share a side yard, and as he was talking to us, I noticed his all-brick house was actually roofing shingles, layered to look like brick. It started to register that he may be a little out there. He's a great neighbor. Just an older, eccentric stoner who keeps to himself and eats my flowers. No shame. Comes over to my yard, and eats my lilies raw, or brings scissors and clips the heads to boil and make jam. It's crazy to me, but we have embraced it. I planted a couple raspberry, blackberry, and blueberry bushes 3 years ago, when we first moved in, on the side yard we share, as well as a few knockout rose bushes. I told him to help himself to berries roses anytime, especially before the birds do. The bushes have all gone insane and the entire side of my house is now a yearly buffet for my neighbor. Having a decent relationship with a crazy guy I share a property line with, is worth some dead-headed flowers. My neighbor was an 85-year-old widow that lived alone. She had 2 vehicles, a car, and truck, and over the course of a few months I realized that she was no longer parking her car in her garage like she had for the many years prior to that. Then suddenly the truck wasn't being parked inside the garage either. Turns out she no longer had room in her garage to park her vehicles because she was walking down to a residential construction site about a block away every evening, and she'd grab 2 2x4s and bring them home. She had over 500 boards stacked in her garage, and when she was questioned on what she was going to do with it, she didn't have an answer. Edit. Bonus crazy neighbor stories. I drove 16 hours straight, pulled in my drive, and crashed on my couch immediately. Must have left the garage door open because I woke up to the neighbor lady shaking me to see if they missed my newspaper delivery that morning also. Neighbor lady thought I didn't clean up after my dog in her front yard. I had never owned a dog, so she retaliated by walking around the neighborhood with a garbage bag, picking up every bit of dog poo she could find, and dumped said bag of dog poo on my front lawn while I was standing in the front window watching. Ran up over $300 on 1 month's water bill of mine because neighbor lady was hooking her sprinkler up to my water when I'd leave for work in the morning and would let it run all day until right before I got home from work. She would put up an ugly orange snow fence between our yards in the fall to keep my leaves out of her yard. Me pointing out that I only had pine trees did not dissuade her from the decision to leave the snow fence up. Edit number 2. Day 1. I should have known something was fishy with this lady. Literally, day 1. I closed on my house at 9 a.m. and had a roofing company at the house waiting for the call that I closed. We spent the day ripping off the old layers and getting bundles up on the roof for the next day. It was hot out. We were exhausted and all sitting in the front yard cooling off when neighbor lady walked out of her house, down the sidewalk to my house. And without even acknowledging the 6 of us staring at her, she walked in the front door and had herself a look-see. She hated dandelions. I found this out the first year that I lived there when I noticed that my lawn was dying off in an extremely weird way. Almost as if someone was spraying weed killer on the stream setting trying to snipe dandelions from 20 feet away. That's literally what she was doing. Being the nice guy I am, I would clean her driveway off in the winter because I had a snowblower. She would never thank me in person, but instead, she'd come over to my house after I had finished and would leave a bag on my front door that usually contained whatever expired goods she had in her pantry. Some of the standouts for me was like a dozen cans of 10-year expired Chef Boyardee, SP, stuff, and once, a half a bag of wheat flour. We had one a while back that had a meth lab in the home. Crazy fights, yelling at all hours of the night. Dude would wander around the hood tweaked out crazy. And once he threw a Molotov cocktail out of the second floor window at another dude who was smashing up his car, screaming, "I'll fricking kill you, motherfricker." Those were interesting times. So, he tried to burn his own car to protect it? Had a neighbor who wouldn't let anyone use his driveway because he didn't want it to get dirty. Anyone including himself. He parked on the street outside. If he thought you were having a party he would drag a bunch of plastic bags full of God knows what to the end of his driveway so no one could turn around it. One time I came home and he was outside hosing it down in the rain. To his credit, I've never seen a cleaner driveway. Our neighbor would leaf blow during a windstorm. It wasn't autumn so there weren't any leaves on the ground, just some other debris. This older lady lives across the street from me and she is obsessed with leaves falling on her lawn. To the point that she will come out of her house and pick up one individual leaf off the grass in the fall, or any other time. She spends hours a day outside with a leaf blower in fall. She will go and knock on other neighbors' doors if she thinks you have too many leaves on your grass. She'll come over into your yard and do it yourself herself if you're not home. What I think is weird is that she's in her 70s, no kids or grandkids living with her, and lives alone in a pretty large 4-bedroom house with an amazing in-ground pool in the backyard, with a slide and diving board and everything. Nobody has used that pool in at least 5 years yet she opens it up every summer. Somehow she likes my family and has never once yelled at us about our leaves and randomly brings things over like half-eaten gallons of ice cream and ask if we want it because she's not using it. Next door lady standing on her driveway yelling at me because acorns have fallen from a large oak tree on my property onto said driveway. Demanding that I cause the tree to cease and desist from this intentional criminal activity. She dug up my fancy flowers and replanted them in her own yard, 15 feet away. I felt this. My crazy neighbor took my new blueberry and raspberry bushes and stuck them in her yard. She replaced them with sticks she found. Used to live in a little town of 300 people where we had an elderly neighbor named Gladys. She would routinely look near our garbage can outside and take the recyclable bottles and cans we would leave for her. After we cleaned out a fish tank, we put the gravel and fake plants in a bag and left it on top of the garbage can because it was already full. About a week later, Gladys hollered at me while I was outside to come over as she wanted to show me something. She had taken that bag we had left and planted the fake plants along the side of her house. She said she wasn't real confident that they would make it but so far they seem to be thriving. I could only nod and compliment her on her green thumb. Better than me who just did the opposite. Moved my daughter out of college and stuffed her plastic succulents into a box. Weeks later she asked where the plants were so she could water them. But they actually survived. Tough little things. We bought a house and on the day while we were unloading the first truckload, the neighbor came into our garage uninvited and started telling us what trees on our property he wanted us to cut down. Not the craziest but the frickin' audacity of some people. I used to live in a homeowner association. One of the members on the board lived across the street from my neighbor and I. He sent a letter to us saying that we all have to mow the lawn on the same day, at the same cut height, and in the same pattern to create uniformity in the neighborhood. My neighbor and I intentionally cut on different days and in opposite patterns just to annoy the guy. Well, I used to have a neighbor who was legitimately mentally ill, although I don't know his actual diagnosis. His truck wouldn't start one day, dead battery, and he told everyone on the street that another neighbor was stealing the electricity. He knew this because of the way this guy parked his vehicle. Obviously, it was sucking electricity from the ground for his battery, which drained the car batteries near him. Many times he would run down the street and warn everyone to hide their valuables because Japan was invading the country. He wasn't on drugs, but he did take medication for his mental illness, and everyone on our street could tell when he stopped taking it. Whenever he would start saying completely irrational things, we would remind him to take his medication, and he would thank us and go home, presumably to take it. He lived alone, and he was getting older, so I think he had a hard time remembering to take it. There were many, many more incidents. When I first moved in, my neighbor walked into the house, unannounced. When my wife gets home, sometimes she wants to stay in her car having a phone conversation. He will come out and walk down the side of his house, checking his sprinkler controls, and looks at my wife. He has two huge bushes he refuses to cut. It blocks our view of backing out of our driveway. The fire department came by to clear trees and bushes around the fire hydrants. The neighbor came out and yelled at the fireman, "This bush is older than you." Needless to say, I hope there are no house fires. We used to live next to a woman that would have a disco party for her cats in her backyard at 2 a.m. every few days. She would put up a disco ball and party lights with music playing. It was a little bit odd, but what made it crazy was her dancing like a Native American performing a ritual around the disco ball. It's honestly one of the strangest things I've ever witnessed. She stalks us. Like every time I get home, she'll walk outside and tell me I was either 3 minutes later getting home this time or that I'm home 2 minutes earlier, and then ask me why. One time my friend and her sister came to pick me up. The neighbor was against her window with her hands and face pressed up on the glass trying to look at who was coming to pick me up. My friend and her sister were so terrified they called me, telling me to hurry up because a crazy lady was staring at them through a window. I replied, "Oh, it's just the stalker neighbor." Yeah, that was a funny day. I once had a red-headed 5-year-old neighbor named Bruce who would do exactly this. I worked at a doctor's office and we had to wear a certain color of scrubs on certain days, so annoying, like just pick one color. I sometimes struggled with this and would forget to have the right color washed and ready, so would have to wear the wrong color that day. One day I pulled into my driveway after work and Bruce was in his front yard waiting for me. He said, "Hey, you're wearing blue and Wednesday is supposed to be purple. You wore the wrong color today." He must be about 21 now. "You were an absolute trip, Bruce. Hope everything is going okay." I cared for an elderly woman for many years. She lived to the age of 93 in a crime-ridden inner-city neighborhood by being as tough and nasty as any criminal living nearby. Her oddest actions involved her incorrect belief that she owned the road in front of her house. She didn't even own a car, but she insisted that nobody park there. She would confront them if they parked in front of her house. If they did it again, she slashed their tires in the middle of the night. Over and over for years. She was never caught, but everybody knew it was her. She only stopped when she lost the physical strength to slash a tire in her mid-80s. Then she started using spray paint on the cars. "He don't park in front of my house no more," was all the justification she needed to damage her neighbors' cars. My friends used to live in a gentrifying neighborhood near the beach in my city. They had a regular apartment, but someone bought the building in front of them, beach adjacent, knocked it down, and put up a few luxury homes. This crazy woman bought one. She had a 2-car garage, and a driveway, and best we could tell, she had 1 car. But no one was allowed to park on the street in front of her house, which was clearly marked as a public street and where people had been parking since forever to go to the beach or because their building didn't have parking. We could see this street from their apartment. She went out and keyed any cars parked there. It took a while to figure out it was her, but eventually, people saw her doing it. All the neighbors warned their friends not to park there, and people started putting up cameras to get evidence of it. Some dude with a piece of shit ugly as truck started parking directly in front of her house every day just to fuck with her, because he didn't care if she scratched it up. So she slashed his tires. It got to the point where every time she opened her door to walk outside, neighbors would cuss her out through their windows. One night she went out in the middle of the night, and painted the entire curb on that street red. Someone got it on video, several neighbors called the city. I think she got a talking to and a fine, and she had several insurance claims pending against her from damage to cars, and she finally stopped. Everyone still hates her though, even new neighbors, who were told the story of her from older residents. My house backs up to a resort. I'm slowly accumulating junk cars near the property line. Eventually, they'll build a fence. Then I'll get rid of all the junk, Bam, free fence. Are you the crazy neighbor? I've heard way more than I need to about their health ailments and bowel movements. One night I'm in the backyard sitting in lawn chairs watching the stars with the wife when she pops out with a flashlight in our faces. I went off. "What the fucking hell are you doing?" She apologized and left with no explanation. I could go on, but then I may start thinking about moving again. The neighbor behind us had a leak in his water pipe and, rather than fix it, he just had the sump pump drain it out into the backyard. This meant that all year round the back of our yard was a little bit damp. Eventually, the leaky pipe burst and filled the house with 5 feet of water. His solution to this was just to keep the pump running and flood the entire neighborhood. After about an hour, a posse of all the neighbors whose yards were being flooded confronted him and called the city to shut off the water. The city fixed the water pipe and the neighbor ended up with a large fine. At least my yard stays basically dry now. I should also mention that this neighbor once rented the house out to a bunch of crackheads and it nearly burned down because the ex-girlfriend of one of these morons snuck in and set the house on fire. She calls the city on everything. Ever walk out, look at your yard and think, "Yep, I need to mow this weekend"? That is the point where my neighbor will call the city and complain that my lawn is too long. If I park on the street, she will call the cops and complain that my car is an abandoned vehicle, even though it has current tags and is parked in front of the house it's registered to. The cops got tired of dealing with her and told me I need to park in my driveway and that I cannot park in the street or they'll tow my vehicle. If she sees my dogs outside, she calls animal control and claims they're being neglected and abused. She is currently going around the neighborhood telling people that I am poisoning her cats, which I'm apparently doing a horrible job of since the cats are healthy and very much still around. She is a truly awful person who is very much mentally unstable. She doesn't just do this to me though. Other neighbors on the block complain about the exact same thing. Anyone else here suddenly realize the reason you don't have a crazy neighbor might be because you're the crazy neighbor? My neighbor in the flat upstairs likes to stand outside my open, ground floor, window at 6 a.m. and argue with her dog. Like, I know you don't want to go home yet, but if you don't stop being a pee-pee you're not getting your sausage roll. Or I'm not the one who wanted to go out, so what's your problem? Happens at least twice a week. Stuck a freaking barbecue fork in my cat. Edit, there are too many comments I can't answer, so here you go. The cat is fully recovered and we couldn't get police because no one saw it happen. Happened on the day they moved in. They are from a country where cats are apparently worth nothing. My mom told me this. I guess they did it because they didn't want the cat at their house, but the cat was used to it from the old neighbors. Not sure if this counts as crazy, but I have this neighbor who is part of a spiritual organization called Brahma Kumaris. Every time someone in the neighborhood is going through rough times, especially deaths in the family, she goes to their house, and instead of offering condolences she preaches how they should join this organization and things will be better. She doesn't acknowledge anyone the rest of the time except the time when someone dies or a new family moves in the neighborhood, to whom she preaches and gives books written by leaders of the organization. Former crazy neighbor, here. I, 23 at the time, female, lived alone in a basement unit in a not great part of town. My bedroom windows, being in the basement, lined up directly with a very busy street filled with bars and lots of traffic. While smoking cigarettes on my stoop, I often had a knife or baseball bat physically with me. To my neighbors, I often referred to a live-in boyfriend often, even though I lived alone. At times I would go as far as yelling at my fake boyfriend in my apartment when I heard other people in the hallway, storming out of the apartment, and telling my neighbors what an asshole my boyfriend was. Also, my neighbors believed I didn't live alone. I had a neighbor who would sneak into my yard at night and roll up my sod. It would be laid perfectly the night before, but I'd get up in the morning and it would be rolled up just like it was when it came from the store. I finally got pissed and spent the night laying by my back door with a baseball bat and a flashlight, ready to bonk the crap out of whoever it was. Sure enough, they came around 2 in the morning, and I stood up, turned the light on, and was face to face with 4 raccoons rolling up my sod, looking for bugs. Do you have a crazy story? Share it with us in the comment section.